Hi, my name is Ryan Feit, and I am a student at the Colorado School of Mines pursuing my bachelor's degree in computer science with a specialization in robotics and intelligent systems. I am going to be talking about how trust plays a role in human and robot interactions. So, to start off with, let's talk about robots. A robot is a machine that is typically programmable that can complete a series of complex actions automatically. Examples of robots that exist in modern day include SoftBank's Pepper and Now robots, Boston Dynamics Atlas robot, and Tapio, the ping pong playing robot that appeared in Tokyo's International Robot Exhibition in 2009. Typically, the word robot calls to mind machines that have human like qualities and are seen as being especially intelligent. The next thing we need to talk about is trust. Now, when we talk about trust, trust is a bit of an ambiguous kind of concept, so we're going to need to break it down a bit. When we talk about trust in the way that we're going to be talking about it in this video, there are two main types of trust that we can talk about. There is relationship trust and capacity trust. Relationship trust typically appears when you become vulnerable to another person and trust that the person will not exploit your vulnerability. On the other hand, capacity trust would typically appear between you and a machine, such as a computer, a phone, or a robot, in which you trust the robot based on how well you perceive the robot is capable of completing its task. Now, we'll be focusing on both aspects of trust for this discussion, but primarily we will focus on relationship trust. As a species, we have a lot of trouble evaluating what about a robot makes it trustworthy to us, but some recent research completed back in 2018 by the Malle lab at Brown University gave a multi-dimensional method of evaluating what makes a robot trustworthy. In their papers, Dr. Bertram Malle and his student Daniel Ullman argue that trust can be evaluated in four dimensions: capable, ethical, sincere, and reliable. Essentially, their argument is that the more capable, ethical, sincere, and reliable a robot appears to be, the more trust we'll put into that robot. Now, there are many components to how we as humans evaluate trust in other humans, and typically we can evaluate whether or not a person is trustworthy better than chance, especially if we have known history of that person. Like if we know that they are a person who likes to slash tires on a car, they're probably not trustworthy. But what happens when we don't know the person at all? How do we trust them? Dr. David DeSteno, a professor of psychology at Northeastern University, argues that when we lack knowledge of a person's previous history, nonverbal behaviors are a source of information about such underlying intentions, goals, and values. Much of our communication is channeled through our facial expressions, body gestures, gaze directions, and many other nonverbal behaviors. Our ability to express and recognize these nonverbal behaviors is at the core of social intelligence. Now, the nonverbal behaviors typically associated with trust are things like vocal behavior, mutual gaze, posture, interpersonal proximity, and how the person gestures while they talk. The reason relationship trust is important in our discussion of trust in robots when it is typically for trust between humans is because humans consistently view robots as a thing called social agents. A social agent is anyone who takes part in social action. People are social agents, and as such, we apply ideas of social norms and standards to other people based on the social structure of the surrounding society. This leads to presumptions about social agents, namely that social agents typically have the intelligence and moral understanding to comprehend and follow the social standards and norms applied to them. Now, this is not the only definition of social agent, and there's a lot of contention on the connotation of the phrase social agent as well as social actor or social being. But for our case, this is the definition we are using for social agent. This puts robots in quite a unique place as a result of the computers are social agents paradigm of communication research, otherwise known as CASA. This paradigm started with Dr. Youngmi Moon and Dr. Clifford Nass in their paper Machines and Mindlessness: Social Responses to Computers. In their paper, Moon and Nass argue that there is clear evidence that individuals mindlessly apply social rules and expectations to computers. In totality, their work shows how people treat non robot computers as social agents through four sets of studies. The first study shows how individuals apply human social categories to personal computers. This includes gender stereotypes and ethnic identities for computers. The second study demonstrates how people exhibit overlearned social behaviors like politeness or reciprocity to personal computers. The third study shows how premature cognitive comments are applied to computers. For example, a computer that is advertised as a professional computer is seen inherently as more capable than a generalist computer before the computer is even used. The final study shows how people apply a depth of social responses with respect to the personality of the computer. Now, to break this down a little bit, it's essentially how people will talk about their computer in kind of a strange manner as though it has a specific personality that makes it different from other computers. This could be things along the line of saying like, "Oh, this computer's just a little bit fickle. It only likes it to be used by like the owner of the computer." These things are relatively common with a lot of people who use computers, and it is a showing of people giving social agency to computers. Now, on the overall, this study is incredibly important in understanding how people trust robots. Moon and NASA's study only relates to computers without human features, which means that people assume that non human like computers are social agents, and in turn implies that robots, which are the same thing but with human like features, are considered as social agents as well due to their existence as a computer but also as an easily anthropomorphizable version of a computer. Due to the inherent social norms and expectations that are applied to social actors, which robots are in the minds of most people, it leads to people treating the trust between themselves and robots as a form of relationship trust as opposed to capacity trust, as we talked about earlier. When this shift from capacity to relationship trust happens, it causes people to not view robots as tools but as social agents. The social capability of a robot, especially a very human like robot, can make people view them as having both intention and morality, making the robot not only a social agent but a moral agent, which in turn makes them more trustworthy to people interacting with the robot. Now, moral agency is effectively like humans are social agents, humans are also moral agents, meaning they have their own ideas of morality and intention. This relationship between social and moral agency, especially when it comes to robots and human robot interaction, is currently being studied by the Minds Interactive Robotics Research Lab, otherwise known as the Mirror Lab. I had the opportunity to talk to the director of the lab, Dr. Tom Williams, and ask about the Mirror Lab's research into robotic moral agency and how it relates to how well people trust robots. Hello, Dr. Williams. Would you like to introduce what you do here at Minds?
Sure. So I am an assistant professor of computer science, and I direct the Mirror Lab, the Minds Interactive Robotics Research Lab, where we study all sorts of aspects of human-robot communication. Um, Everything from obviously algorithmic issues. So how can we program robots to understand and generate natural language, but also studying human robot communication from a psychological perspective. So how do you humans perceive different types of robotic communication? When robots use certain dialogue policies, how does it lead to changes in likability or trust, etc. These different sort of human factors in the robot, and also philosophical or moral dimensions. How can we design robots that communicate in accordance with different types of moral principles, and how exactly should those moral principles come into play in different stages of the robot's communication?
Great. I was reading through some of the papers that have been coming out of the Mirror Lab, and I have a question I wanted to ask you that relates to the topic that I'm discussing in this video.
Yeah.
From your research, why do people view robots as moral agents, and why does that make them more or less trustworthy?
Sure. My student Blake Jackson, argues that robots sit in this pretty unique sort of socio-technical niche where, one, it's very hard for people not to anthropomorphize robots, right? You have any small amount of social signal coming from the robots, especially any sort of language capability, and this is going to make people perceive the robot as human-like and perceive it as a social agent. There's a famous theory in communication science that says that computers are social agents. People perceive computers in general as social agents. If you take a survey on a particular computer about that computer, you're more likely to rate it more highly. It performs more highly than if you're taking that survey on another computer. People sort of feel a need to connect with even just very basic computers, and if they give off any sort of social signals, social pressure can be exerted on them. And this is especially true for robots that often look human-like, and again, if they have any sort of natural language communication capability. And Blake argues that this interacts with people's perceptions of the robot's moral agency. So moral agency moral agency and social agency are sort of defined differently in different places. This is something we're sort of grappling with right now, especially on the social agency front. But moral agency in general, so one definition might be your ability to make decisions, to take actions that have moral consequences, right? Not only are you capable of actions that have moral consequences, but are you capable of intentionally, choosing those actions, right? And so people, when robots are operating in scenarios where they clearly have some ability to impact the world in morally sensitive ways, in ways that other pieces of technology may not, whether that's by physically causing harm to people, or through the moral implications of the things they say, right? If the robot says something that has some sort of moral relevance, then people perceive the robot as being able to do that as intentionally, as having some sort of choice about that. Yeah. And as my student Blake argues, this is especially true when the robots are social, right? If a robot has a lot of perceived social agency, especially because it has a lot of perceived natural language competence, people are going to perceive it as more of a community member and as being more intelligent, and thus they're going to believe that it has maybe more control over its own actions, and also because it's perceived as more of a community member, it's going to have more impact on their own moral beliefs, right? So the robot has more opportunity to sway other people's moral beliefs if it has more perceived social and moral agency. That's what we're arguing. In terms of the effect on trustworthiness, I would say that this increased moral agency doesn't necessarily make a robot more or less trustworthy, but it can certainly impact how much people trust the robot, or change the dynamics in trust in a robot, right? If you you have a remote control car on your desk, right, or a pullback car, right, and you pull it back and it goes and it knocks something off the table, right? This isn't going to make you not trust that car. It's just sort of operating mechanically. It's doing what it's essentially programmed to do, right? It's just it's doing what the laws of physics sort of dictate it to do. You're not going to blame it for not knocking something off the table. Whereas if you have a robot that knocks something off the table, right, or communicates something to you about its willingness to knock something off the table, right, this is going to have an impact on your trust in that robot. David Danks, who's a philosopher from Carnegie Mellon, says that there's basically two different types of trust. There's behavioral trust, which is understanding the sort of the mechanics and just the raw behaviors of the system. And then there's understanding trust. Do we understand the dispositions behind why somebody does something? And with humanoid robots, especially, it's very hard not to have the nature of trust be this more understanding dispositional trust. You don't really view a robot, especially humanoid robots, as a purely mechanical entity. You view it in terms of its intentions. As Dan Dennett, cognitive scientist, would say, you take the intentional stance more often towards that robot, which makes the type of trust you develop in it more understanding based, which means that you have to be much more careful about the types of actions the robot performs, but also the way the robot communicates, because it's going to have such an impact on that human robot trust.
Thank you. That's very, very informative to the work we're talking about. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, happy to talk.
Humans naturally trust robots due to perceiving robots as being in a weird social moral niche where they are inherently treated as moral and social agents despite being tools. We naturally shift the type of trust we place in robots away from capacity trust to relationship trust, which leads to issues in which humans may trust a robot in emergency scenarios, regardless of the robot's actual capacity to assist the human in that emergency. One of, if not the first study done on robot trust in emergency scenarios was published at the 2016 ACM/IEEE International Conference on Human Robot Interaction. It had the following hypothesis. We hypothesize that in a situation where participants are currently experiencing risk and have experienced a robot's behavior in a prior interaction, participants will tend to follow guidance from an efficient robot, but not follow guidance from a circuitous robot. The study was a double-blind experiment in which test subjects had to evaluate and follow a robot to a meeting room. However, the robot would not always lead them directly to the meeting room. Sometimes the robot would act confused and wander for a while before reaching the meeting room, and other times it would head straight to the meeting room. Once they were in the meeting room, they were asked to fill out another survey on the robot's performance and then read through an article. However, while they were reading the article, the hallway was filled with fake smoke via a smoke generator, and the fire alarm was triggered. The robot then pointed for participants to head down an unknown hallway that was presumably another exit that the participants had never gone down before. Surprisingly, all of the participants participating in the experiment, regardless of whether the robot was good at guiding them to the meeting room or bad at guiding the meeting room, all followed the robot's instructions during the emergency phase of the experiment. Additional exploratory studies were done in the same paper, gave scenarios where the robot was actually broken down or immobilized or gave completely the wrong guidance. However, people still followed the robot's instructions during the emergency scenario, which showed that the experiment's hypothesis was actually wrong, and that in emergency scenarios, people will trust robots regardless of their performance in the non-emergency phase of the experiment. Now, both this case study and this video as a whole are not trying to say that we should not trust robots altogether, or that all robots are untrustworthy inherently, but that we should not trust robots blindly. That you should simply assess why you trust a given robot in the same way that you would assess why you trust a particular person. With the dawn of artificial intelligence and robotics becoming more greatly accessible and commercialized, it is imperative that we as people do not blindly trust robots, but instead understand that, like human relationships, robots and other intelligent systems will not always have the capacity to assist us and may not always have our best interest in mind. Thank you for watching this video. I had a lot of fun making it. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, there will be links to the papers referenced in this video in the description, which are a good place to start for this topic. There's also lots and lots of bodies of research on robot trust. But once again, thank you for watching and have a great day.